So now I'm going to invite you to sit back and envision yourself back in the 1920s, gathered around the console radio, waiting for the broadcast to begin as we present the continuing saga and dramatic series of Suicide for a Kiss.
Welcome to the Mosaic Radio Theater Live. Tonight's dramatic episode is a true crime presentation entitled Suicide for a Kiss. Our playwright is Robert Thimmes. Our music trio is Keagan Mahan, Nick Kleiner, and Garrett Green. Our voice actors include Craig Showalter as Detective Joe Wilcox, Aaron Drake as Prosecutor Harvey, Robert Thimmes as Defense Attorney Haynes, John Robertson as Judge Jones, Mario Criner as Raymond Kadel, Rebecca Randolph as Mabel Sturgeon, Libda Tatarian as Lita Yount, and introducing Emily Thimmes as Ali Kopak. The characters are real people. The events described really happened. Some of the dialogue is imagined for the sake of our radio play, but make no mistake, these events are true, ripped directly from the headlines, and they happened right here in Troy, Ohio. In previous episodes, we witnessed the chain of events that led to the mysterious death of young Ruth Kadel. Its suspicious nature led Prosecutor L. Harvey to open an investigation into those circumstances. Dayton Detective Joe Wilcox was quietly brought on board in an effort to sift for clues. We join Joe now, seated in the gallery of the Miami County Court of Common Pleas. Let's listen in as he muses on the Kadel case.
The grand jury had met, considered the evidence, and listened to the witnesses, all 41 of them. The night before they rendered their verdict, I joined Sheriff Matthews and his deputy at the Kadel home to round up our suspect. When he arrived, Raymond sat there, eating his dinner, dressed in his Sunday finest. Matthews told Raymond the prosecutor wanted to see him, and he might have to stay overnight in Troy. We drove back to Troy in 2 machines. Kadel, accompanied by his mother and the deputy, drove his own machine. Sheriff Matthews and I followed. We took him straight away to the county jail and booked him on a charge of suspicion. He acted very unconcerned and seemed not the least bit surprised that he was to be placed in a cell. He calmly kissed his mother and walked into the cage like he was taking a stroll through the park. His ma, on the other hand, sobbed her belief in his innocence, declaring that if anyone would tell the truth, he would be freed. She was sure he had some enemies who were telling lies about him. She was a mess, but Raymond Kadel, he was one cool customer. The following day, the grand jury indicted Raymond Kadel for the murder of his wife Ruth in the 2nd degree. Of course, he pleaded not guilty at his arraignment, which he arrived at, smoking a cigar and chatting up the sheriff. He even said jail had him feeling fine and getting a rest. To see him at the defendant's table now, laughing and joking with his attorneys and friends during jury selection, you wouldn't know he was on trial for murder.
Prosecutor Harvey, make your case.
Yes, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the state intends to show beyond a reasonable doubt that on the morning of November 28, 1926, Raymond Kadel did knowingly and willfully murder his wife, Ruth Probst Kadel. The state will produce witnesses and evidence to prove the falsity of the contradictory statements made by Kadel in regards to the manner in which the death of his wife occurred. Bear in mind, the defendant has told 2 different stories as to how his wife met her death, and has changed the details of the accident many times over. The state will show that Kadel and his wife were not happy and that Kadel had been untrue to her.
Defense Counsel Haynes, make your opening statement.
Very well, Your Honor. Our august prosecutor, L. Harvey, would have you, the jury, believe that the injuries sustained by my client's wife that fateful night were inflicted by my client knowingly, willingly, and with malice aforethought. We, however, intend to demonstrate that the fatal injuries of the unfortunate deceased came as a result of either her jumping or falling from the machine. The prosecutor's entire case is based on rumors and hearsay, much of which is caused by the fact that the residents of the community are still thinking of the sensational Nesbitt murder case. Why, they will probably even tell you that Raymond Kadel is related to the Jake Nesbitt in some tortured, twisted way. As to the contradictory statements my client has made, all will be clear when my client takes the stand. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please know, Mrs. Kadel was of an affectionate nature, and when her husband had not responded to her caresses, had often made threats of doing herself bodily harm. When the couple was on their way home the night in question, Mrs. Kadel tried to caress her husband, and when she rebuffed her, she carried out her threat of killing herself.
Lawyer for the defense, W.A. Haynes, Bill to his friends. I respected him, but I didn't like him. He was good. Like any of us, he had a job to do. But in my opinion, it wasn't to get at the truth. It was to cloud the issue, to raise doubt, to get 12 men and women to sit at odds with the evidence and with each other, to serve the interests of his client, to win. In my opinion, this time, he was the devil's advocate.
Mabel Sturgeon, please take the stand. Do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but?
I do, sir.
Miss Sturgeon, you have heard prior state testimony from Lonville Wilson, attending to the fact that your brother sat next to him at the Doghouse restaurant and that Raymond told him he had just brought a woman from Vandalia who had been hurt in an auto accident. You heard Wilson testify that he had left the restaurant at about 12:40 and that Raymond had entered the restaurant a few minutes before with blood on his hands.
Yes.
Mrs. Sturgeon, what time did Raymond return to your house to pick up Ruth?
Raymond showed back up between 12:15 and 12:30.
Miss Sturgeon, may I call you Mabel?
Yes.
Mabel, please relax. You have testified at the coroner's inquest and the grand jury. This is no different. Just take a deep breath and calm down.
This time is different. My brother is on trial for murder. I don't know what to say, what to tell you.
The truth, Mabel, just the truth. Mabel, you heard John Dickey, the waiter at the Doghouse, tell the same story as Wilson.
Yes.
They all agree on the time Raymond Kadel entered the restaurant and what he said despite Mr. Haynes' attempts to shake their stories. Miss Sturgeon, Mabel, you heard Mr. Sturgeon attempt to shake your husband's Corey's story about your brother's actions, their timing, and his inebriated state.
Objection, Your Honor. Let the record show that Corey Sturgeon did not say my client was drunk, merely that he had been drinking.
Sustained. I believe the record already shows that, Mr. Haynes. Continue, Mr. Harvey.
I will, Your Honor. Mabel, Corey testified Raymond had been drinking. You heard Lloyd Weaver and Howard Allen, your brother's companions that night, both testify that Raymond had drank at least 8 drinks of whiskey before they had parted company. Weaver testified he and Raymond later colluded to not tell authorities of the whiskey that they had on Saturday night trip. Allen admitted to being drunk when they dropped him off at the Doghouse. Mabel, was your brother drunk when he came to your house to get Ruth?
Well, Rachel noticed right away and said so.
Said what?
That Raymond had been drinking.
In your opinion, was he drunk?
He told her to shut up. He didn't act himself. If that was from the alcohol, I can't say. He usually kissed Ruth when they greeted, and that night he didn't. He answered her questions about where he'd been and where he got the drinks. We could all smell it on his breath. With, "It's none of your business, and it's none of your damn business."
How did she react to this?
I've told you before, it really hurt her.
Mabel, was he drunk?
I can't say.
Okay, let's move on. How long was it before Raymond returned with the injured Ruth?
About 45 minutes.
So that would put him back at your house at about 1:15?
Yes.
How would you assess Mrs. Cable's condition upon her return?
Well, she never regained consciousness.
And her injuries?
Blood was running from her nose and one ear. As soon as the doctor looked at her, he said she wouldn't last long.
Was there anything about her appearance that was noteworthy?
The collar of Ruth's coat had dirt on it, and there was some fine gravel in her hair.
Thank you, Mrs. Sturgeon. Your witness, Mr. Haynes.
Mrs. Sturgeon, Mabel, if I may, you testified there was gravel in Mrs. Kadel's hair.
Fine gravel, yes.
And dirt on the collar of the coat?
Yes.
Gravel and dirt that could be found on a roadway?
Yes, I suppose. I don't know. I'm mainly occupied with the young'uns, Mr. Haynes.
Mrs. Sturgeon, I'm sorry, Mabel, did you think Ruth's injuries were serious?
No, I didn't know. At least Doc Schilling said so.
Did anyone in your family think they were serious? I mean, besides Raymond?
Well, no. She was bleeding. Please, Mr. Haynes, she died in my house.
Mabel, I'm sorry. I know this is painful. At the inquest, you stated you had 10 children. You just mentioned how busy they keep you. I would assume they keep you hopping. Is it possible your recollections of the night in question might be informed by fatigue?
Mr. Haynes, if you're saying I was too tired to remember things clearly, then know this. I heard what I heard, and I saw what I saw. 20 children would not dull the memory of that night. My sister-in-law died in my house. My brother is on trial for her murder. I take exception, sir, to your question.
I retract the question. My apologies. Nothing further.
You may step down, Mrs. Sturgeon.
Is the prosecutor making his case? Will the defense attorney exonerate his client? Tune in to the final episode of Suicide for a Kiss, to be aired later in this broadcast.